Thank you for joining Westminster's Peace and Justice Work Group this evening. Tonight, we welcome Sarah Grunewald from the Delaware Community Foundation to lead a conversation about bridging divides and encouraging civil discourse. As Executive Vice President for Strategic Engagement, Grunewald leads the DCF's community engagement work, including overseeing grant-making and scholarship programs, facilitating public-private partnerships throughout the state, and driving the foundation's leadership activities to strengthen the DCF's community impact and service to donors. She also works internally to build a positive, engaged, inclusive, and productive culture at the DCF. A native Delawarean, Grunewald most recently served as Deputy Executive Director at the PIE, Policy Innovators in Education Network. And she previously spent 7 years at the Rodell Foundation of Delaware, where she facilitated the design and implementation of a statewide vision in support of world-class schools. Grunewald earned her bachelor's degree in political science and economics from UD and a master's of public administration from New York University. So we're so glad to have you here tonight, Sarah. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and bringing us in. I've heard a little bit from Lynn about this group and the things that you've been exploring over the last couple of years, right? And it sounds like there's a lot of things that, a lot of synergies and great things. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here. I did prepare some slides to help just kind of go through so I can remember and keep on track. So I'm going to share my screen. That you see it? We're good? Okay. So I thought it might be good to initially lay some groundwork about what a community foundation is. I'm curious if anybody familiar with the Delaware Community Foundation or community foundations in general?
Yes. There's a lot about the DCF. I mean,
oh, good.
Mostly, I look at the numbers coming through on contributions sometimes, and it seems that you're involved.
Good, very good. Glad to hear that. It's not always sometimes it's kind of like we talk about what we do, and I had no idea this was in our state. So it's nice to know that people are hearing about us. We did a lot of work with COVID response in 2020, and just wrapped that up earlier this year. And so I think that helped us become more, known to more people. But really high level overview. The first community foundation was founded over 100 years ago. The Cleveland Foundation was 1914. And the idea behind this, and what it remains is true for community foundations today, is to pull the charitable resources of generous people into a permanent endowment, to say an organization that is based in and knows the community that can then get that money out into the community based on the community needs now and in the future. So they were really looking ahead towards not just where they would be giving dollars now, but setting up and endowing those dollars into the future. Today, there's over 700 in the United States, and globally there's over 1,800. There's not many statewide community foundations. Delaware is one of only several. Usually in smaller states, usually their community foundation would be a county or a region or even a city in large metropolitan areas. So this is some examples. The one on the right is Silicon Valley, which has, one more click, like billions of dollars of an endowment. The one on the left is this Shickley community, is in the tiny town, is less than $2 million endowed. So really wide range. And there's this saying that if you know one community foundation, you know one community foundation, because we operate in a lot of different ways because of the communities that we work in. But there are several things that we all have in common. We're committed to the place where we are. So in that case, Delaware and all 3 counties. We are here for the long term. So I talked about kind of endowing and looking for what's the needs of the community now and in the future. We are charitable 501c3 organizations. We have a large amount of different funds to match different interests of generous people around the whole state, and lots of different ways of giving. We have families, businesses, sometimes other foundations, individuals, nonprofits all have funds with us. Specifically, the DCF, it was founded in 1986. We have nearly 1,200 separate funds within our 392 million endowment, or I'm sorry, assets under management. And that puts us in about the top 10% of community foundations in the country. The separate funds, these could be things like, or are things like the Fund for Women, if anybody's familiar with that, which has about $4 million endowment, and it's awarded over $3 million in grants, all to issues supporting Delaware women and girls since 1993. And it's run entirely by volunteers. That's a giving circle type fund. There's also donor advised funds, which generous people establish to meet their specific charitable goals. You might know of this concept through a financial services company like Fidelity or Schwab. They started to provide donor advised funds over the last couple of decades. And we believe that the way that the Delaware Community Foundation is different from the ability to do that through a financial services company is because we are committed to our place. We have close connections with the community and we understand it. And so we can really make connections for people to help them achieve their charitable goals because we are in and of the community. And I'll talk more about that. We also have youth philanthropy boards, which are really exciting. We have a fund that supports a board of high school students in each county. And each year they determine a focus for grant making. They develop an application, they take applications, review and evaluate them, and make grant decisions where the money is going to go out in their county. So it really builds the future of philanthropy among these young people. So our vision is, and I believe this is in some of the materials that you got ahead of time in the newsletter and everything, our vision is a Delaware where generosity expands opportunity for all and enhances the common good. Our mission is to empower and grow philanthropy. We do that through our knowledge and relationships. That's what I was talking about, like what differentiates us. We're in this community, and we want to do it now and in the future. We want to set things up. I can help respond to what I know is going on now, and the Sarahs 50, 60 years from now will be doing the same thing if we do our job right. So I talk about the community impact part of my work, which is really around engaging the community and our donors. And what does that look like? It really is helping the donors, all of those fund advisors and fund holders that I mentioned in those almost 1,200 funds, give with greater impact. So they might have an idea of where they want to direct their giving, and we can help match great organizations doing great work so they can achieve their charitable goals. We make grants to community organizations. That's how we can develop this understanding of what's going on in the community, because we're getting applications directly and learning about work that's going on in the community. In the last several years, we've made an intentional decision to target more investment into traditionally underrepresented leaders and communities of color. So we're doing a huge effort to really understand our past grant making when we weren't tracking data about where we were giving. So we have some benchmarks and we can really say, okay, here's how we want to improve our giving and be more impactful in that area. My team also drives our internal organization-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So that includes pieces, both our internal processes and procedures, as well as how we make our grant making and our everything we do more accessible and equitable. And then we share big ideas, spark community conversations, and inspire action. And this is really where I think you all found us around the building opportunity and the book circles that we do. But it's a really important piece of the Delaware Community Foundation's strategy, is to say, again, what differentiates us? We know our community. We can make these matches with generous people that want to give to the community, and we can be a leader and a partner on new big ideas because we are a neutral entity. We're nonpartisan. We kind of have connections with government and with community and with philanthropists, and so we feel like we can really bring people together for conversation. And so, as I'm sure you know, this year we are welcoming Monica Guzman. She is the author of I Never Thought of It That Way. Is that right here? As many people do that I've been talking to recently, which is awesome. And And this book is really about bridging divides and being curious. It's how to have fearlessly curious conversations in dangerously divided times. We think this is so important because civil society and democracy is central to the work we're doing around advancing equity, building opportunity, a strong community. And so we've been trying to, this is our 5th year of getting an author to come to the state, bringing in new ideas, big ideas, and having people discuss them. In the past, we started out with Robert Putnam and his book called Our Kids, and it was really about this notion of social capital, and that it really depends on what you're born into and what connections you have for the things that you're going to be able to get in life, and how quickly the differences in each person's ladder can show up if they don't have those connections. Then we had a husband and wife team with a book called Our Towns, that they went around to towns, small towns all around the country, looking at how communities were building themselves back up after some large downfalls like economic disasters or that kind of thing. In 2020, we welcomed Wes Moore, who was the author of a book that looked at Baltimore after the murder of Freddie Gray in police custody. And unfortunately, that was an incredibly timely book in 2020 because of the events with the George Floyd. And, you know, we talked a lot about how, why is this book was written 5 years ago, or this event happened 5 years ago, how are we still wrestling with how to prevent it again? Last year, we welcomed Heather McGee, who's the author of The Sum of Us. And that was really about how if we link arms and look at what we all could gain by eliminating racism and overcoming our traditional infrastructure of systemic racism, how much we could all benefit. So it's not a zero-sum game that we'll all have to lose in order for someone else to gain. And then this book, it just feels like a great next opportunity to say, okay, we're in an election year, right? Things are potentially as polarly divided as possible. We feel it in our family conversations, potentially in our community conversations. How can we start bridging those divides so our community structures, our family structures, all of these important things don't crumble and really last through these hard times? So we're thrilled to have this book. We've been getting great feedback. I don't know if anyone's been able to read it yet or is planning to join us on November 16th. That's when Monica Guzman will be in Delaware, up here in Wilmington at the Hotel DuPont. And we also will be streaming. You can get a ticket for streaming as well. But we're thrilled to have her. We're so excited. We've been hosting these book circles. We've done this every year where we purchase 500 copies of the author's book, and we give them out to book circles around the state. We have about 60 different book circles running this year. They started actually in August, and we were almost out of books in record time, like within the first month, which was really, really exciting. One really cool thing that I wanted to share with you all is that when Monica is here on November 16th, she's going to lead a workshop with the high school students that are part of our youth philanthropy boards that I mentioned, because we had the opportunity to have a little bit more time with her than just her presentation. And we thought, wow, what possible impact could we have with young people to really dig into, okay, how do we talk to people that we don't necessarily agree with? How do we start bridging those divides? How do we build that community? So I'm really excited that we're going to be able to do that, and she's graciously given us more time on that. So that's what we're doing in the community leadership kind of right now, the bridging divide directly. The DCF also is exploring how in a community of our peers around the country, other community foundations, how we might be able to support more local journalism, how we could support more civic dialogue and democracy building. because we think it's a really important role for a community foundation to play. And we're looking at, again, if we can kind of join forces with some of our peers around the country, we might be able to really find some scale in the work that we're doing. So I'd be happy to go into more things. I have a few more slides that I put at the end around our grant making, around our COVID response. But really, that's just kind of an overview of what we do and specifically where we are with our building opportunity work this year. And if you're interested in different ways that you can get involved, if you aren't already, of course, you can open a fund, a grant, to give grants, to set up scholarships. We have legacy fund possibilities. One of our biggest unrestricted funds is called the Delaware Forever Fund, and that's where generous people entrust their resources with us to say, you know, the community, and we trust you to give these grants where they're most needed now and forever. The COVID strategic response, I need to update that. That's actually been closed. We got all those resources out, still at $5.3 million of those resources out the door. We also have a leadership campaign, which is an annual campaign to support the organization. If you haven't already, I would love to share the link for our newsletter so you know all about events we're doing, podcasts. You'll hear stories about our donors, about our grantees. And then we do have some opportunities for volunteering. The most, I guess, front and central one is we have grant and scholarship committees. So there's a group of volunteers that when we get all the applications in for our competitive grant programs or our scholarships, reviews those and helps us make the decisions about where the money should be allocated. So that's kind of where I'll stop for now, and I'd love to open it up for any questions or thoughts or clarifications.
Sarah, I'd love to learn more about the way this year's book circles were set up in terms of, were any of them deliberately set up to engage people that come into it with very different ideologies and things? Were they deliberately trying to do some of that in this year's book circles?
That's a very good question, and one that has come up in many of the book circles. I led one of our community ones, which is just one that was open to everyone a few weeks ago. And we've been having staff conversations too, like, okay, it seems as though this is all really good stuff, and both people need to come at it with a open mind and the curiosity, right? And so how do we overcome that, or at least address that? So it's a great question. In terms of setting up this year's, we have great partnership with the libraries. So we really feel that the libraries are able to get two different people that we normally aren't, don't have direct connection with. But we do lean heavily on folks that have been doing this with us for several years. So, it is hard to say, are we preaching to the choir, or, how can we kind of expand this? I will say that anecdotally, people that have read the book, it kind of reads as a guidebook to having these conversations. And several people have had the opportunity to put it to use, either in their professional situations, in their personal family situations. And in that way, I do believe that there's a ripple effect, right? Because they're kind of, putting these into practice, and even seeing these I never thought of it that way moments, which she talks about in the book. Kind of, you have these aha moments, and it's kind of, okay, let me think about what this looks like and how I can be curious about this and not make assumptions. So it's a great question, though.
Don't be shy, guys, because I'll keep asking questions.
Sarah, I'm wondering, do you ever get involved in facilitating debates, especially debates where maybe people have to switch sides?
So we have not taken on that formal role. But I will say that we are often invited to a table because we are a more neutral voice, and we can kind of provide, and it feels like we're not taking sides. One thing, and this kind of, I think, Lynn, goes to your question as well as Sally's. One thing that you'll hear about or you'll read about in the book, if you read it, is a whole project that Monica did, where she brought together, and very intentionally, differently minded people, and paired them together, and I had conversations. And as I read it, I thought, this is amazing. As I've been talking to people about it, they said, how can we do this here in Delaware? So I'm trying to cook up how we could recreate that. I think you need very skilled facilitators and a very good structure to be able to do that well. But now that we have the connection with Monica and her organization that she works with called Braver Angels, which really does just that, it kind of tries to, they very much look at it on the political spectrum, and they pair blue and reds together. How can we bring that to Delaware and have these kind of conversations here?
Roger?
You mentioned the donor advised fund. Is this somewhat like a donor advised fund? I mean, I use Fidelity. And how compare and contrast what you do and what they do? I mean,
Sure.
I know what they do, but
yeah. So yes, it's the donor advised fund concept. We have the majority of our funds at the Delaware Community Foundation are donor advised funds. So $15–16 million go out our door every year, and the majority of that is from these funds. There's only a modest portion, I should say, that are the unrestricted dollars that go through the grant programs, the competitive grant programs that I mentioned. So how is it different? Fidelity, Schwab, I think just in the last couple of decades have been able to offer that option. And for some people that know exactly where they want to give, it's probably the right choice, because frankly, they have lower fees for that. It's just, fees to kind of manage the money and get the money out the door. The advantage that we have is that if you don't exactly know where you want the money to go, or you're interested in this, arts, or you're interested in animals or the environment, we have the knowledge of the community to say, here's some organizations doing great work. Or we also, we have like access to all of these events, and we bring together our community of givers. So the connections among people, and knowing and knowing our community and knowing what the greatest needs are. So that's kind of our comparative advantage.
and of course it would be local. So local meaning
Exactly.
you within the state of Delaware, within a radius of Delaware. What's
Yeah.
local?
So givers are not required to only give in Delaware. The majority of our donor advised funds do, because they're usually Delawareans that set them up or have some connection here. And then from there, it kind of goes out to the region, the southern Chester County in Pennsylvania, the Eastern Shore of Maryland, that kind of thing. But we have people giving to their alma maters all over the country. So they're not restricted to only give to Delaware. But it's where we see the primary, most of the money going.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are you partnering with any other organizations as you try to look at this whole civil discourse, improve democracy conversations? Are there any other organizations that you're partnering with who are also trying to find a path to promoting more civil discourse in Delaware?
Yeah, so there's an organization in Sussex County that I always get these mixed up, the Southern Racial Justice Collaborative, because then there's also one that's based, the United Way runs up here in the Newcastle County, and we work with both. The YWCA has done a lot of really interesting work related to similarly getting book talks and getting people to engage in dialogue around important conversations. And I mentioned the libraries before. I've learned so much about our state library system. It's fascinating. It's not just kind of all one cascading system. Some of them are independent and that kind of thing, but they all are doing incredible work. Libraries are really a hub of a community. The things that are provided in those places, all the services and everything. So I think there's a huge opportunity there as well, to be reaching more people in different ways. The Wilmington Library in particular, I don't know if any of you have gone to any of their programming over the last couple of years, but the executive director, Jamar Rahming, his philosophy is he wants to bring the world to Wilmington, and he is. Like things, and in really interesting ways. People that you think, why would you bring Dennis Rodman, or like what, but it's like, because I want to provoke conversation. and it is. And so really interesting things like that. We actually have a podcast that's launching right after Monica's presentation in November, that'll highlight some of the people that are doing interesting things to have these conversations. And he's one of them, the Wilmington Library head.
Roger, is your hand up again?
No, I'm still pondering what she said. So let me take it down.
Sarah, I was wondering if any of the upcoming conversations around the book are, let's say, centered on families. In my generation, which is probably your grandfather's generation for sure. In my generation, ourselves and friends of ours are reluctant to bring controversial topics up in the few times a year that we may be with our children and our grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
Our children have moved away. Our grandchildren are nowhere near here. So when you get together once or twice a year, there's a great reluctance to talk about differences of opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything in this book or these upcoming discussions that we're going to have focused on families like our family or maybe your family? But
Mm-hmm.
it just feels to me like families have just decided not to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we can't get families to talk about it, I don't know how we can get diverse groups of the community to sit down and talk about differences in a meaningful way. But is there any family focus at all in this?
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely encourage you to read or listen to the book. I can send to you all a really good TED Talk video that she has done. But she starts out the book and she starts out this TED Talk talking about her own personal experience, that her parents, who are immigrants from Mexico, how they voted for Donald Trump in the last election, and how the night of the election, she, as a non-Trump supporter, was driving to their house and almost turned around because she knew that what they were gonna get into when they got there. And she goes into a lot of the things the tensions that it caused for them to have different points of view, and how they work into it. So she brings her own personal experience in very much. And I expect her to do the same in the presentation that she gives. And then there's also some anecdotes in the book about people, like the situation that you're describing, like getting together for Thanksgiving, and there's that uncle or that aunt, that you just don't want to go there, but it's putting a wedge in relationships, and what a shame that is. and how we might start conversations and listen and be open-minded for more, to kind of just understand where people are coming from. So there is a lot in there related to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. A lot of really interesting research and science too around the things that make just natural instincts that make people make us create these like us and them kind of scenarios. Social science experiments with, where it's so easy to kind of create these us versus them, and what we can do about it. So.
And we feel like the church should, and well, any faith-based community is one of those places where you should be able to, engage people that have very different ideas about things, yet have something else so much in common that there's a built-in reason to want to listen to each other and learn from each other and hear different perspectives. So I feel like there is a role for faith-based communities to help promote, more civil discourse and discussions among people with very different views on things.
Absolutely. If I may, question to you all, do you find that people are open to the church playing that role, or are surprised that the church wants to play that role, or, do they think you're in a certain lane because you are a faith-based organization?
Please.
I'll-
Go ahead.
I'll just add that that's a topic that's come up in our adult education, whether we could, in the committee, whether we could have sponsor some debates, or how could we be engaged in this kind of discussion? Lynn.
Yeah, I think it's something that the Peace and Justice Work Group has also wrestled with. We've been doing these Thursday evening classes for a long time and really enjoy, learning new things about new topics and stuff. But we tend to be a collection of fairly like-minded folks, not on everything. There's obviously some diversity in perspectives and stuff among our group as well. But I think we've struggled with, how do we expand that? If we want to be having conversations with folks that have some very different views, how do we do that when, although I know that our church contains people with very differing views, those that have started congregating within our Peace and Justice Work Group probably are a little bit more, a little more uniformity within this group. And so we've struggled with, how do we change that? How do we, widen that so that we get more and broader participation?
Yeah, there may be, this book too, it kind of reads like a guidebook for things. And in the first chapters, she talks about SOS, so that we sort. The first S is sort. We kind of, we sort into these like-minded groups. And then O is for othering. So then it very much becomes, if you're not in this group, you're other, and then siloing. And then we just get deeper into our silos. It gets comfortable, and it's like-minded, and, and it's hard then to even digest or consume other things because you've set this up. But she has some practical things, and none of them are like groundbreaking, or, but it's like things you can do, like read some articles from the other side on a regular basis with curiosity, and have that conversation with people that have a different viewpoint on something. Because even if there's uniformity in this group, there's probably things that are still different among the group. So not even assuming that they're all have that alignment. So there's some, I think, some good suggestions in this one to that end.
There was I think it was a series of commercials at a Super Bowl time one year, and the commercials had people that were fairly well, these two people came together in a room, and then they had some kind of conversation that was more sort of small talk, and they seemed to be getting along all right. And then they told each other a little more about each one of them, and they were like polar opposites on a lot of like lifestyle and all kinds of you know, things about them that really would normally, they wouldn't get along. And then they said, okay, now knowing what you know, it's up to you whether you would like to have a beer. This was a beer commercial, Heineken or something, and talk more about, you know, your differences. And because at the point where they interjected that, they had been getting along quite well. And they had, in this series of commercials, they had a number of different, you know, couples of people that came together. And it was a really interesting example of, you know, people saying, okay, I choose to engage further and to find some common ground, or at least get to know each other better.
Yep.
I wish I could find that because it was really well done.
That's that sounds similar to, in a more, you know, informal way, maybe to something that she describes, work that she had done in this book. And another thing I found fascinating, and I'll try to remember to send this link to you too, is research that has been done about, I think there's 10 or 11 shared human universal values, right? And there's this quiz that you can take to say what, so we all have the same, it all boils down to we have the same values. It's just what we prioritize in those, right? And so a lot of what causes tension and conflict is because I feel like you're questioning my values, that I don't have values. But really, we all share the same, you know, safety for our families and these kinds of things. And it's just then the specifics of how we prioritize them that play out in what's important in decisions that we make. So I think it's really interesting to be able to think like, this isn't about how different we are. It could be about how the similarities that we have. Yeah.
Just interested in, you say you solicit volunteers, but what do the volunteers do typically? I mean, and what sort of ratio of staff to volunteers is in the DCF?
Yeah, sure. So we don't have like a lot of volunteer opportunities where that's a lot of other nonprofits do, where we need to gather a whole mass of people to do something. But our board is all volunteers, and then some of our major committees, like our grants committee and our scholarship committees, are made up of volunteers from around the state. We have right now 16 full-time staff members. I don't know the exact proportion, but let's just like ballpark. We have like 20, low 20s of board members. I have 30 grants committee members and like 60 scholarships. So we have a lot more volunteers than we have staff, you know, over 100. And so those, and then I mentioned these philanthropy boards as well. We have advisors on those boards that are volunteers. So it's in that kind of capacity where they'll be advising the students on their grant making, or they're actually reviewing grant and scholarship applications and helping us make the decisions, meeting with the community organizations. I have to tell you, and I'm biased because I work with these committees, but they are so much fun, and people get to learn so much about the community because you're meeting with all of these organizations that, you know, that are looking for money and learn about what they're doing. It's actually when we have a new board member come on, we usually put them on the grants committee first so that they can learn about what we do. And then every once in a while, we have a cool opportunity like we have in a couple weeks where we're supporting with Discover Bank the building of a new playground at Neighborhood House in Wilmington. And literally on build day, we're gathering volunteers. So our board and committees, and a little bit beyond if we can get it, to help build that playground. So sometimes we get to do fun stuff like that too.
No other questions?
I feel like I have a lot of follow-ups that I mentioned I'll share. So I hope I hope you all can might be interested in joining the presentation on the 16th. Like I said, in person and live streaming option, and sign up for a newsletter, because then you can get all of the new information as it comes out about things we're doing, and the stories of our grantees and our donors. So
Sarah, I'd just like to say thanks so much for coming tonight. I learned a lot. I was only sort of vaguely aware, and I'm really glad to know about what you all are doing.
great. Well, thank you again for having me. And Lynn has my contact information, and so please share it. And if anybody wants to get in touch, please do.
It might be nice to know what the last 2 or 3 books you've done in your book circle, because we have the One Book, One Church program now going for the last year. And if there are some thought-provoking books that you have done,
Sure.
that might be quite interesting for us to review. I think we're interested in other different types of books, fiction and nonfiction.
Okay.
Well.
Yeah, I can pass along the specifics of the last ones we've done.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Sarah, you mentioned a website, so we can go to your website and get some of these things most likely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can see specifically, find the registration for the event, and I can send these as well. And sign up for the newsletter and learn about our grant programs, all that kind of stuff.
Great.
And
Yes.
learn about funds, if you're interested in setting something up. Yep.
And I just wanted to say one thing about grants, or about philanthropy, really. I know sometimes folks in their 80s and 90s who have traditionally been very philanthropic find it, especially in today's climate, harder and harder to be as generous as they once were. And it's very bothersome personally to them.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this happen in my own world of people. And I so I like churches. Sometimes churches and organizations like yours are really helpful in that they provide opportunities for people to engage without always having to part with money that is a little harder to manage at some points when you come upon. And that with the church, it's a big, it's like a family, but it's cradle to grave, like a family is. You have relationships that start with birth and go on to death, and there are all kinds of those in a church. That's why I think a lot of times we're very much more sensitive about others' feelings in our churches, and not in thinking, okay, I'm probably, what are those 3 things you just said? I'm probably the other. You're always kind of feeling like the other in this organization. It's just been hard, and especially in these divisive times, to feel as comfortable as you once did. So a lot of things going on. And I think that I'm glad to see that you have a website and that you have opportunities that don't necessarily give people a chance to contribute, but maybe not with money.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But Susan, I don't like the idea of you thinking of yourself as other.
You can't help it, I think, in a church that and I'm also a native Wilmingtonian, and this is our 5th church, Westminster, but I've always had a church family. I never have known life without a church family. And so it's a huge part of my foundation in my life. And I do think that churches have suffered with divisions or perceived divisions, and feeling sometimes like the other. What were the other? You had 3 things you said. Oh, the silo. The silo.
Sort of, yeah.
It's very profound. Wait. Yeah. Anyway, just a couple of comments. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so I've written down the names of everyone who is with us this evening. So Sarah, anything you share, I will definitely pass on. But we tend to get a lot of folks who watch these after the fact as well. So I will just tell people, anyone who's watching this after the fact, you can email me at lynn@keelhorn.us, and I can forward on anything that we have received from Sarah. So for
Great.
those watching after the fact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, both Sarah for taking the time to educate us about DCF, all that you do, and particularly this great work in encouraging civil discourse, and all of our attendees. It's so great to see all your smiling faces as well.
Thank you again for
Thank
inviting
you
me.
so much.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Thanks. Good
Take
night.
care. Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sarah.